World Health Organization slams Trump after he threatens to cut funds amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Chinese doctors in Venezuela make house-to-house visits as part of a coronavirus prevention campaign. And the Afghan government has allegedly released 100 Taliban prisoners, but the group has yet to verify their names. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez and this is from the South. In the United States, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has ended his presidential campaign, making Joe Biden the main frontrunner to challenge Donald Trump for the post in November. Sanders broke the news to his staff on Wednesday. The announcement follows Tuesday's primary held in Wisconsin amid stay-at-home orders to curb the spread of the novel coronavirus. The results have not yet been announced.
I wish I could give you better news, but I think you know the truth. And that is that we are now some 300 delegates behind Vice President Biden, and the path toward victory is virtually impossible. So while we are winning the ideological battle, and while we are winning the support of so many young people and working people throughout the country, I have concluded that this battle for the Democratic nomination will not be successful. And so today, I am announcing the suspension of my campaign. Please know that I do not make this decision lightly. In fact, it has been a very difficult and painful decision. Over the past few weeks, Jane and I, in consultation with top staff and many of our prominent supporters, have made an honest assessment of the prospects for victory. If I believed we had a feasible path to the nomination, I would certainly continue the campaign. But it's just not there. I know that there may be some in our movement who disagree with this decision, who would like us to fight on to the last ballot cast at the Democratic Convention. I understand that position. But as I see the crisis gripping the nation, exacerbated by a president unwilling or unable to provide any kind of credible leadership, and the work that needs to be done to protect people in this most desperate hour, I cannot in good conscience continue to mount a campaign that cannot win and which would interfere with the important work required of all of us in this difficult hour.
Our correspondent, Jorge Salsa from Washington, has more.
Thank you. Bernie Sanders announced that he's suspending his campaign. He said that he was making calculations and he's running behind 300 delegates from Joe Biden, and mathematically it's impossible for him to be able to win the nomination, and therefore he said that he's suspending, and he's using the word suspending that is different from dropping out, because he said that he is going to continue to appear in the ballots of all the primaries from here to the end of the process, and that is going to let him continue to gain delegates, and therefore he said, I want to reach the convention. Initially there was in July and now has been postponed to August, even if it's a virtual convention, with the most possible delegates in order to influence the platform of the party when we reach the end of that convention. And that platform, he wants to include what has been the basics of his campaign, that we're talking about universal health care. He said precisely, this pandemic has shown the big failure of the system that we have actually, he said, because actually we are having about tens of millions of Americans unemployed, and their health care was absolutely tied to the employment. So now they found that are not only unemployed but also uninsured. And he says that shows that it's absolutely necessary for the country to have a universal health care. He also mentions the rights that he believes that has to be with the people. He says that, of course, healthcare is a right and not a privilege, that the Americans should have the right to have access to university with no payments, with no economic failures, also the respect for the planet with the climate change. And also he said that he is leading a movement, not a political platform, but a movement that is multi-generational, multiracial, and he wants to continue that movement and bring it on. So he said, I'm suspending my campaign, but I am pushing for this movement to continue to go on and to reach then the Democratic Convention with the most strength, with the more delegates, and with the more people behind the movement. He praised Joe Biden. He said that he's going to be behind Joe Biden because he said that the most important purpose of this campaign is to beat what he called the most dangerous president in the history of the United States. That's how he defined Donald Trump. We get back to you now.
That was Jorge Salsa from Washington. And U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to stop funding the World Health Organization, accusing it of bias towards China and missing the mark on the COVID-19 pandemic. He claimed the UN body's biggest source of funding was the United States. But according to the WHO, Washington provided 14.67% of its funding in 2018 and 2019.
They called it wrong. They called it wrong. They missed the call. They could have called it months earlier. They would have known. And they should have known. And they probably did know. So we'll be looking into that very carefully. And we're going to put a hold on money spent to the WHO. We're going to put a very powerful hold on it. And we're going to see. It's a great thing if it works. But when they call every shot wrong, that's no good.
And the World Health Organization responded to Trump's comments, warning him and other leaders against politicizing the virus.
Please don't politicize this virus. It exploits the differences you have at the national level.
Against politicizing the virus.
Please don't politicize this virus. It exploits the differences you have at the national level. If you want to be exploited, and if you want to have many more body bags, then you do it. If you don't want many more body bags, then you refrain from politicizing it. My short message is, please quarantine politicizing COVID.
Venezuela has received a new shipment of humanitarian aid from the Pan American Health Organization, the United Nations, and Russia. The aid includes medical equipment such as ventilators, protection gear for health workers, and COVID-19 testing kits. Venezuela is currently under a financial and economic blockade by the United States, despite the United Nations call on the Trump administration to end it, especially due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, China, Cuba, and various international organizations have decided to keep sending humanitarian aid to Venezuela. A group of Chinese doctors in Venezuela has carried out house-to-house visits in the capital, Caracas, to identify possible cases of the new coronavirus. These visits are part of a cooperation program between Venezuela and China. The group attended homes based on an online survey where citizens could report if they show symptoms typical of COVID-19. The Chinese doctors said these visits are part of an early prevention campaign and seek to alert communities of suspected COVID-19 cases. And the government of Venezuela has imposed a curfew in the municipalities of San Antonio de Táchira and Ureña, near the border with Colombia. This comes after 3 paramilitaries tried to enter the country, hidden amongst thousands of citizens that are making their way back home.
These people are going back to their home country after being thrown out and abandoned on the streets of Colombia. The pandemic has unmasked the falsehood of the supposed humanitarian aid given to them by President Iván Duque.
Did you have medical attention? Water, food, nothing?
Protocol is followed as they enter the country. They are tested for symptoms of the novel coronavirus and are put under quarantine for 14 days. But even during this global emergency, the attempts to overthrow the government of Nicolas Maduro don't stop.
People in power inside the Colombian government are taking advantage of Venezuela's generosity and are trying to infiltrate paramilitaries, deserters, mercenaries who are coming here to sow violence. We had suspected something like this would happen, and so we are checking everyone's fingerprints at the border and matching them in real time with our citizenship database, and also running them through the police database and Interpol. This led us to the capture of 3 paramilitaries.
One side of the paramilitaries was trained in Rio Hacha camp, where recently a coup plotting operation was dismantled that had the support of the Colombian authorities and the U.S. government. The plan was to smuggle these firearms into Venezuela to assassinate President Nicolas Maduro and other high-level officials. After the assassination plot was foiled, the government of U.S. President Donald Trump moved forward with a different strategy. Attorney General William Barr, who was previously involved with the 1989 invasion of Panama and helped hide the irregularities of the Iran-Contra scandal, presented baseless accusations against the Venezuelan president and other high-level officials for alleged drug trafficking. As the next step of the strategy, Donald Trump announced the mobilization of the U.S. Southern Command to the Caribbean Sea under the excuse of protecting his people from the drug trade. This came just as the U.S. became the global epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic, with about 400,000 cases and nearly 13,000 deaths.
It's not a secret what we are going through. The bodies are so many that we have to come and assist them.
The White House advisor for the Western Hemisphere did not waste time in revealing Washington's true intentions with this strategy.
This is definitely a take-it-or-leave-it situation. We have seen a series of actions that must make Nicolas Maduro regret not taking the many opportunities he has had over the past 6 or so years. When Venezuela started to feel maximum pressure, he must regret not taking those opportunities to leave, as his situation will not improve.
President Nicolas Maduro has sent a letter to U.S. citizens alerting them about the possible war in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Trump's government has once again activated his institutions to achieve his electoral goals, under falsehoods and under the guise of a fight against drug traffickers. He has ordered the largest deployment of U.S. military forces in the region in the past 30 years. He wants to threaten Venezuela and wants to bring us into a costly and deadly war with no end in sight.
A graphic made by the DEA confirms that 84% of drugs headed for the U.S. depart from Colombia's and Ecuador's coasts, while only 7% come from Venezuela. And paradoxically, in the 5 years since the U.S. installed military bases in Colombia, drug production has increased by 285%.
We're taking a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back. More news at this hour. Jamaica's Prime Minister Andrew Holness has announced that the government will be extending the nightly curfew implemented to fight COVID-19 on the island. The measure started on April 1st and was expected to end on April 8th. It prevented the movement of non-essential persons between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. The Prime Minister also said that other restrictions currently in place to address the pandemic, including working from home and the closure of all borders, will also be extended. Jamaica has 63 confirmed cases and 3 deaths related to the virus. Trinidad and Tobago has recorded 107 COVID-19 cases and 8 deaths as the government continues to ramp up efforts to fight the virus. The health minister warned citizens that the pathogen is evolving and asked the public to stay at home.
Anybody who is outside of their homes, not on essential business, you are the pinnacle of a pyramid of infection. You will infect 2 people, then 2 will infect 6, then 6 will infect 10. And then all those 10 persons start up their own pyramid. And you get this explosion in cases. And that is what we are trying to avoid with these stay-home orders.
Peru has extended its quarantine measures, including home confinement, night curfew, and border closures, until April 26 to combat the pandemic.
We don't want there to be a risk that the great effort to end the state of emergency early than what professionals and experts actually recommend will end up reversing this situation.
Brazil has now over 700 deaths caused by the novel coronavirus, but an underreporting of cases and the low number of tests are being highlighted as an obstacle in the fight against the pandemic.
As of April 2nd, the Villa Formosa neighborhood in São Paulo registered 40 burials per day suspected to have COVID-19, the same number that was reported by the Health Ministry for the entire nation. The Union of Public Workers denounced a lack of equipment for workers at the funeral homes and also confirmed that official numbers do not represent reality.
We were surprised about the reported number of deaths. We demand that the state report the real numbers, but they aren't doing it. So we call on the press and all institutions and organizations to make this demand from officials. The government has the obligation of informing people and of implementing the appropriate measures to protect public workers and regular citizens.
The Health Ministry and the President of the Supreme Court signed an accord to allow for the burial of bodies without a death certificate in cases where there is no family present. The local government in São Paulo asked to release the reports of those who died in hospitals or in their own homes.
This week, one of the worst things imaginable took place in Brazil, when the government authorized the burial of people without the proper certificates determining the cause of death. This is a dangerous precedent. It only happens under a dictatorship.
Since mid-March, the Villa Formosa cemetery digs 100 graves per day, as opposed to the usual 50. Funeral homes in São Paulo have increased operations by 20%. The Minister of Health recognizes that the lack of testing doesn't allow for real numbers to be reported. And while more laboratories are starting to process COVID-19 tests, there's still a waiting list of over 16,000 people.
Ignacio Lemus y Julia Nassif para Telesur desde São Paulo.
Now to Bolivia, the de facto government has appointed pulmonologist Marcelo Navajas as the new Minister of Health after the resignation of Aníbal Cruz. Cruz resigned on Wednesday after facing criticism over his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Bolivia's mortality rate as a result of the virus ranks above the global average of 4.7%, standing at 6.5%. So far, 210 people have tested positive for the illness, with 15 dead and 2 recovered. A shipment of medical aid from China has arrived in Mexico City as part of the government's plan to bring in personal protection equipment for hospitals in Mexico. According to the Deputy Health Secretary, Hugo Lopez, the shipment mostly includes hazmat suits, surgical masks, and N95 masks. He also said Mexico is expecting more of this kind of shipments from China.
Equipment and medical supplies are coming in from China. We are very grateful to the government of China because they have facilitated the process to acquire equipment that we did not have.
Liberia has declared a state of emergency and announced a lockdown in the capital, Monrovia. Movement between the country's 15 counties will also be banned from Friday midnight, and all non-essential businesses and government offices will close.
Throughout this period, residents may leave home only for essential journeys, for reasons of health and food. We should be restricted to your local community only and be limited to a single person per household for a maximum of 1 hour.
Coming up, more stories, so stay with us. Thank you for joining us again. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has begun a third day in intensive care. Johnson was hospitalized late on Sunday night after his COVID-19 symptoms persisted.
People, I'm sure, will also want an update on the Prime Minister's health. He is receiving excellent care from the NHS team at St Thomas's. The latest from the hospital is that the Prime Minister remains in intensive care, where his condition is improving. I can also tell you that he has been sitting up in bed and engaging positively with the clinical team.
16-hour-long talks on a coronavirus economic rescue plan for the Eurozone, worth up to $583 billion, has broken up without a deal. Negotiations were suspended between 19 finance ministers of the Eurozone amid divisions over the conditions that should be attached to credit issued by the European Stability Mechanism. Countries hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, such as Italy and Spain, can draw on emergency credit lines and request about $259 billion in loans. Talks are expected to continue on Thursday. Italy, the country with the highest coronavirus death toll in the world, has recorded 552 new fatalities in just 24 hours. The European nation has over 92,000 active COVID-19 cases.
The total of people positive with COVID-19 is 95,262, with an increase of 1,095 patients testing positive since yesterday. The total deaths today is 552. The total number of recoveries has risen to 26,481, and we have 2,099 new recorded recoveries since yesterday.
Also in Italy, a huge section of a bridge has collapsed in Tuscany, leaving 2 people injured. Given Italy's nationwide coronavirus lockdown, there were only 2 trucks on the bridge over the Magra River in the province of Massa Carrara. One of the drivers was taken to a hospital with minor injuries. The other driver was able to climb out of his vehicle unharmed, but suffering from a shock. The incident comes as Italy is still working to rebuild a heavily used bridge in Genoa, which collapsed in 2018 during a rainstorm, killing 43 people. In Belarus, the president continues to dismiss calls for a curfew amid the COVID-19 pandemic, as the country recorded 205 new infections for a total of 1,066 cases and 13 deaths.
We can see that all around us they keep spouting quarantine, curfew. It would be a piece of cake. We could do it within 24 hours, but what will we eat? It's no longer only a few officials from international organizations who are talking about famine in the near future, but everyone else is talking about it too, including yesterday's most developed, most advanced countries and their leaders.
Russia has announced measures to help businesses and people cope with the economic impact of the coronavirus crisis. These include unemployment benefits equal to the amount of the minimum wage and allowing small and medium businesses to reschedule their debts.
Everyone who lost their job and applied to the employment service after March 1st, I propose paying unemployment benefits in April, May and June automatically, and at the highest bracket, which we have already increased, equivalent to the minimum wage of 12,130 rubles.
Afghanistan has released 100 Taliban prisoners, claiming they were among 5,000 detainees to be freed under a deal between the group and the United States. However, the Taliban said they have yet to verify those released were on the list they handed over to the Trump administration during the talks. The Taliban withdrew a technical team to oversee the releases because of delays by the government. The U.S.-Taliban deal signed in February also calls for the Taliban to free 1,000 government personnel they hold hostage. And with that, we end our news brief. But you can find these and many other stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.